She waited 30 years for me. A woman I met once, wrote letters to for 2 years, and then abandoned in 1993 without so much as a goodbye. I did not deserve what happened next. I am 70 years old, and last spring I married her, in a small church in a province in the Philippines, in front of a family that had every right to hate me and chose to forgive me instead. But to understand how a coward gets a second chance 3 decades late, you have to go back to the beginning, to a young sailor who made the worst decision of his life and spent the rest of it not knowing it. This is the story of the letters I stopped answering, the box my late wife never knew about, and the woman who was still there when I finally came looking. Stay with me. It is not the story you think it is. It started with a stopover. I was a young man in the United States Navy, and in the early 1990s, our ship put in at a port in the Philippines for repairs. I was not looking for anything. But there was a young woman named Remedios who worked near the base, and I met her the way you meet someone when you are 25 and the whole world is still ahead of you. We had exactly 9 days before my ship moved on. 9 days of walking and talking, and her teaching me words I could not pronounce, and laughing at me when I tried. And when I shipped out, I did something I had never done for any girl. I wrote to her, and she wrote back. For 2 years, we wrote letters across an ocean. Real letters, on paper, the kind you waited weeks for. She told me about her province, her family, her dreams. I told her about the sea. In one letter, she wrote the line I would remember for 30 years. She wrote, "I will wait for you as long as the waiting means something." I was falling in love with a woman on the other side of the world, one envelope at a time. And then I ran. Not dramatically. That is the shameful part. There was no fight, no falling out. I simply got home, got a job in Ohio, met a woman my mother approved of, and got engaged. And I made the calculation cowards make. I told myself the Philippines was a fantasy, that Remedios was a young man's dream, that real life was here. And rather than write her one honest letter explaining, rather than giving her the respect of a goodbye, I just stopped. Her letters kept coming for a while. I stopped opening them. Then I put them in a box. Then I put the box in the attic. And I got married, and I built a whole life, 37 years of marriage to a good woman, children, grandchildren, a mortgage, a retirement. I was not a bad husband. I loved my wife. But somewhere above my head, in a box in the attic, a young woman's letters sat unanswered, and I taught myself not to think about them. For 30 years, I almost succeeded. My wife passed away 3 years ago. And last year, my children convinced me the house was too big for one old man, and it was time to downsize. So I went up into the attic to sort a lifetime of boxes, and there it was, water-stained, dusty, exactly where I had hidden it from myself. I sat down on the attic floor, 70 years old, and I opened letters I had abandoned when I was 27. Her handwriting, her voice, still young, still hopeful, asking why I had gone quiet, wondering if she had done something wrong. And the last letter, the one I had never even opened, dated 1993. I broke it open with shaking hands. She had written that she understood, that she would not write again, that she hoped I had found happiness, and that she would always be grateful for the 9 days and the 2 years of paper between us. She had let me go with more grace than I had ever shown her. And sitting on that attic floor, an old widower, I finally cried for a young woman I had wronged half a lifetime ago. And then I did the math. If she was still alive, she would be 67, and a thought took hold of me that I could not shake. I owed her an answer, even 30 years late. I want to be honest about the odds, because I want you to understand what a foolish, hopeful thing I was about to do. I had one name, Remedios, and one province, from the return addresses on letters older than some of my grandchildren. I did not know if she was alive. I did not know if she had married, moved, forgotten me, or would spit at the mention of my name, which she would have been entitled to do. I did not know if her town still existed as I remembered it. Everyone told me it was impossible. My own daughter, gently, told me not to break my own heart chasing a ghost. But I had spent 30 years being a coward, and I decided I would rather be a fool. I reached out to people online who helped find lost family in the Philippines. I sent the old address. I sent the name. And then I waited by my phone the way she must have once waited by her mailbox. It took 2 months, and then a message came back. They had found a woman named Remedios in that province, a widow. She remembered an American sailor, and she had agreed to meet me. We met in a bakery in her town. I chose a bakery because I was terrified, and a bakery felt safe, public, ordinary. I got there an hour early. I am not ashamed to tell you that a 70-year-old man sat in that little shop with his hands shaking around a cup of coffee he could not drink. And then the door opened. 30 years older, gray in her hair, lines around her eyes. And I knew her instantly. I knew her the way you know your own name. She was a widow too. Her husband had passed some years before. She sat down across from me, and for a long moment neither of us could speak. Then she looked at me and said, "So you finally wrote back?" And I laughed and cried at the same time, and I said, "I am 30 years late, and I am so sorry." She reached across the table, took my old hand in her old hand, and said, "You are here now." We talked for 4 hours. Two widowed people in their 70s, both terrified, and both, somehow, completely certain. It was the strangest and truest feeling of my entire life. The fantasy I had run from at 27 was sitting across from me, real and forgiving, and still here. We were married 8 months later, in a small church in her province. And I have to tell you about her family, because it is the part that humbles me most. They knew the story. They knew I was the American who had disappeared, who had broken her heart and married someone else and vanished for 3 decades. They had every right to slam the door in my face. Instead, her sister took my hand at the wedding and said, "We are just glad she did not have to wait any longer." Her nieces and nephews called me Tito, which means uncle, and meant it. This is something I have learned about this culture that I did not deserve to learn. Forgiveness here is not a grudging thing. It is a whole family deciding to let the past be the past so that two old people can be happy in the time they have left. At the reception, I stood up and did the thing I should have done in 1993. I answered her letter, out loud, in front of everyone. I told her, and all of them, that she had asked me once to wait, and that I had failed her, and that I would spend whatever years I had left being the man who finally showed up. 30 years late, I answered the letter. So here I am, 70 years old, living in a province in the Philippines with the woman I abandoned when the world was young, and I promise you, I know how absurd and how lucky that is. I do not tell you this story to make myself look good, because in this story I am the villain for the first 2/3 of it. I tell it because I spent 30 years believing the door I had slammed was locked forever, and it was not. If you are old and widowed and carrying some regret in a box in your own attic, some person you wronged, or some road you did not take, I am not promising you a bakery and a wedding, but I am telling you that it is later than you think and not as late as you fear. Thank you for listening to my story. If any part of it reached something you keep in your own attic, then sharing it was worth it. And if you would like to hear more real experiences like this one, feel free to subscribe and follow along, because the letter you are most afraid to answer might be the one still waiting for you 30 years later, patient as the sea.